All right, guys, good evening. Those of you that were tuning in or waiting to get in, we started a tad late, had some technical difficulties. So thank you for being here tonight. If you're in person or online, if you're watching or if you're going to catch us later, that is cool as well. So we are still in our Eschatology Series, 18th week. That's a lot of weeks in this. What we're probably going to do is just finish out because we don't have Wednesday nights for June and July. Still have fellowship supper, but no Wednesday nights for June and July. So we will probably do eschatology, the last thing stuff until the summertime, and then we'll just break, and then we'll have a new series or stuff laid out when we come back in August for Wednesday night Bible study. So I just decided we'll just do all that. So that'll give us 20 plus weeks in the Eschatology series, which is totally fine because there's probably a year's worth of stuff to talk about. But we'll just manage and do that. So I've enjoyed it. Hopefully you have too. Those that have been tuning in or those who've been following it, and those who've showed up. So if you do show up, obviously there's a huge benefit of having the notes here. What I have, you'll have. And so tonight will be the Olivet Discourse, and this will be part 3 of the Olivet Discourse. We had a lot of questions about that. People were curious about what that means and stuff that they've heard. So I thought it was good to kind of give a few weeks of that to just explain it, just so that it's clear and people understand all that's going on. So the Olivet Discourse, as we've discussed the last 3 weeks, is really a question and answer session between Jesus and the disciples. So it's kind of 2 parts, and the first part kind of jumps into us at Matthew 23 because it's important that we get some context, and so we'll read that again in just a minute. But the Olivet Discourse occurs on the Mount of Olives in response to the question that the disciples had at the temple in Jerusalem after Jesus had given these 7 woes to the Pharisees, the religious leaders, and the Sadducees. So Mark 24, and you have some parables in 25, but the bulk of the argument and struggle is found in Matthew 24, or at least the most debated stuff. Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And I would say that all of these passages are just kind of parallel passages. So they are really describing the same conversation, just there's Luke's account, Mark's account, and Matthew's account. And Matthew 24 is the most in-depth section that we have. Matthew gives the most time to the Olivet Discourse in his Gospels. And so we discussed a few views, and we will continue to. So we talked about the preterist view last week. In the preterist view, that view states that not necessarily all of it, but most of what Jesus is saying in the Olivet Discourse has already occurred. It already occurred at the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. That's that view. And people that take kind of a preterist view or a past fulfillment view, they're pretty locked into that point. Now, last week we went over that, and there again, I am kind of, at least over the last couple of years, kind of in real time walking through some of these views, looking at them. And really, prior to that, I had never really taken too much of an in-depth look at it. I just kind of was like, yeah, I kind of believe that. I probably took more of the view of today's view of a futurist approach, that it will be a future fulfillment, Matthew 24, pretty much all of it. But I just kind of took that because I think that's just what I heard so much as a young believer, and then probably even just in passing, I would just kind of hear that view, and it was like, well, clearly it hasn't happened yet, so I just kind of must take that view. And if it's in the future, then not that I don't have to worry about it, but when it happens, and we'll just be ready and be faithful, whatever happens. So I do feel like I'm kind of like, not necessarily late to the game, but I just have no problem saying that. I think some pastors may struggle with saying, hey, I know exactly where I'm at, and I land here, and everything else is wrong. And I just don't really have that view for this particular, these texts that are debated. But I will say this, starting to look at them in a much more in-depth way, the preterist view, or at least I guess what I would say that I would be more okay with, is a partial preterist view, meaning that some stuff in Revelation and some stuff in the Olivet Discourse, I would say just from the basic reading of the text, probably has already occurred. Now, there is a lot of stuff that is yet to come, But when you read this text, and we'll read Matthew's account, and you can read along with me. We did that last week and the week before, and I think it's really helpful. We'll read this, and you can just kind of go, okay, just from looking at this language, how he talks, past language that Jesus has used with the disciples, that view does not seem far-fetched at all. It actually seems like, oh, that can make sense. Now, just because you haven't been taught that, or you haven't been instructed that way, or no one's ever said, hey, why don't we look at it from this angle, that doesn't mean that it's wrong. And so just because you've been told something all the time, maybe even authoritatively, that doesn't mean necessarily that we should just believe that, if that makes sense. So I think we should just be mindful of that. So the preterist view is past fulfillment. The view we'll look at today, after we flip the board, is the futurist view, which they're saying, this view is saying almost all of it, pretty much everything in Matthew 24 is a future event that has not happened yet. AD 70 was not what Jesus was referencing at all, and he is talking about something in the far future when you have the Antichrist come. Like that's that view. That is beyond 2026, and it's obviously well beyond Jesus in the Gospels, or AD 70. So this is well beyond this view. And then we have the historicist view, which is kind of a fulfillment throughout church history, from first century to the return of Christ. And then kind of the idealist view. And what we'll probably do is combine the historicist view and idealist view when we come back in 2 weeks after Fellowship Supper, and kind of combine both of those, because those are somewhat similar. So, but the idealist view is more of the symbolic view that what Jesus is referencing in parts of the Olivet Discourse is really kind of a already but not yet, continual cycle that's going to just keep happening until his return. So, like I said, all of them have good points. All of them make good arguments. But there again, and I've kind of done this with every view, and I will do this. And I did this, I thought I was trying to do a fair job when I explained the different views of the millennial reign, to give you kind of, here's what the view is, here are the pros to it, and here's some of the challenges to that view that other people may say, well, what about this? What about this? And may pick apart. So, some context, Matthew 23, and we've kind of gone over this multiple times because I think it is helpful to understand this. Matthew 23, 29 through 39, he has given these woes to the Pharisees. And I do not want to read 29 through 36. We will start in verse 37. So Matthew 23, we'll start in 37. And just read his lament over Jerusalem because of our time, and then we'll jump right into the Matthew's account again. But obviously, Jesus has been very intense, even since, this is 24 that the Olivet Discourse is in. Really, if you look back in your Bibles, all the way back to Matthew 21, he starts to give these parables about not everyone's going to be in the kingdom. Some of you guys are not going to be there. Like, there's going to be judgment on this generation. There's going to be massive weight and judgment because you have rejected the Messiah. And that's very clear. So Jesus is literally, and I think this is important as well, he's literally kind of scolding the people of that day because he arrived as Messiah, and they want him dead. They want to crucify him. They don't want him to be on the scene. They don't want to acknowledge his miracles, although they can't deny them, but they don't want to be, they don't like that because he's a major threat to their power and their establishment, to what they have going on in the temple, which is why Jesus, when he shows up in Jerusalem, goes into the temple very early on in the Gospels and cleans it out and drives people out with a whip, flipping over tables. That's cool. If that doesn't tell you where Jesus' understanding and his view of what the temple had become, not a place for sinners and sacrifice, but a place to make money off the backs of people who were broke and feeble and could be easily manipulated. So all of these things kind of happen, and then Jesus gives this woe to the Pharisees, basically says, hey, you're kind of just like your fathers who killed the prophets, even though they're like, no, we're not like them. We wouldn't have done that. But yet, Jesus is on the scene. The Word fulfilled and made flesh is on the scene, and what happens? And yeah, absolutely, they deny him. So obviously, he says, if you're denying me, you for sure would have denied the prophets. So then he gets to the lament, Matthew 23, 37 through 39, and he says this, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood, or gathers her hens, under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. House being a reference to the temple. Like all of this has been left desolate. For I tell you, You will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Reference to Psalm 118 right there. And then also to note that in Matthew 21, the triumphal entry that happened obviously prior to this, the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, that is what they are saying. Like they literally are quoting Psalm 118 in reference to his triumphal entry. Although they don't quite understand what they're bringing in, they are referencing it too. And so anyways, all of that to say, if we back right up, and I wanted to read verse 36, because he talks about the destruction on this generation, and he says, verse 36, Matthew 23, 36, if you go up just one above the lament over Jerusalem line, it says this, truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. So it makes it very clear. All the judgment, all the harsh, all the intensity, not that it can't still be down the road for sure, right? Because the Lord is coming back for the second time. But he's making a reference point that this generation, those who I'm speaking to, this is going to come upon you. And a generation typically was 30 to 40 years. That was typically like the understanding if you said this generation. If Jim told me, Will, in your generation, he would be thinking in the average lifespan that I would still be living 30, 40, maybe 50 years down the road. Like that's in your generation, or if he just said to Villarica, in this generation, meaning a lot of you are still going to be alive when this event happens and goes down. So let's go ahead and read the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, 1 through 51, and then you can follow along, make some notes, stuff you have questions, and then we'll flip to the futurist view. So just listen to the words, think about what he's saying, keep all of this in mind with what he has just said in the 7 woes and then the lament over Jerusalem. He says this, so Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, you see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And so you can reference Mark 13, verses 1 and 2, where they're asking, they're not even really asking a question. I shouldn't have probably worded it like that. They literally look at the temple and they marvel at the temple. Look how incredible it is, Jesus. Isn't this crazy and awesome? Look what the Lord has allowed us to build. And then Jesus comes into this response as they're leaving the temple and says, you see all of this, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. So what is he? I mean, there's no way to get beyond what he's predicting when he says that. There's no way you can't read around that and go, well, I don't really think he's talking about the temple being destroyed, because literally it happens in 70 AD during the Jewish revolt. So the Jewish-Roman War, that's when that happens in AD 70. And then it says this, and as he sat on the Mount of Olives, so it's almost like as they come out of the temple, they kind of are talking about it, Jesus kind of glances at it, makes a statement about all the stones being down, and then as they travel on out of the city onto the Mount of Olives, then it's like he sits down and the disciples come to him privately. Let's see, Peter, James, John, and Andrew? I think it was those 4 who come out to him, and we have that in Luke's gospel, where they come out to him and they privately say to him, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All of these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation, and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, And let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in the house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christ and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner room, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, the vultures will gather. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the power of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in the heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. From the fig tree, learn its lessons. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you will know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Verse 36, we'll finish this. But concerning the day and the hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. The two men will be in the field, one will be taken out, one left. The two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken out, one left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is faithful and wise servant, whom his master has set over his household to give their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and he begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and he will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So there's 24, all of it, 51 verses. So we discussed the preterist view, and we talked about how, in kind of the breaking point, if you just kind of flip back and look through the Olivet Discourse, is it seems that at verse 35, that concludes, 35 concludes the first portion of the disciples' question about when will these things happen? And that's referencing what? This whole temple ordeal, Jesus. All they've known is the temple, right? Think about this. At this point, Jesus has not been on the cross, so the veil hasn't even been torn. So in their minds, what? The temple is still operational. It's what God is going to use to be a at least temporary covering of sin, and you're talking about this temple being destroyed? Now, he does reference in other places where he says, I will destroy the temple and in 3 days rebuild it. Now, what is that a reference to? Right, his body, his burial and resurrection. But here, he's talking specifically about the stones not being on top of one another, which, as we saw in Josephus' writings last week, that in Josephus' writings, who was a historian but not a Christian, just a Jewish historian, like kind of non-biased, just recorded history, he stated that over 1 million Jews died in that revolt in the 7-year war of the Jewish and the Jewish-Roman war, and there were the temple was systematically disassembled, like every stone taken off systematically, and they leveled the temple, which is exactly what Jesus is referencing here in in the text. I mean, I just don't, it's really hard for me to kind of get past not seeing it in that way. So the preterist view states that through verse 35, that would have already occurred. That would have already occurred at the AD 70 revolt and the temple being destroyed. And then from 36 to 51, a lot of people in the preterist camp would say, well, that he is now talking about, because he says, but concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels or of heaven nor the Son, but the Father only. And so really, I mean, now as you read that more and more, and I just kind of saw this yesterday as I was reading this, is Jesus talking, I mean, because that's a massively debated text. 36 is like a super difficult text. Is he talking about future stuff? Is he kind of reverberating and going back to answering some more about the temple, about being mindful about that? Who knows? Want to be taken, want to be there. All that kind of gets jumbled a little bit. But it just seems to me as I read it, there's a little bit of a break there going, okay, now concerning the day or the hour, no one knows. On what? When will you return? Because you've talked about you dying and resurrecting, but when will you return? So the disciples, though, that are sitting there, it's those four, and Jesus is at the Mount of Olives, and he didn't inquire to them. They engaged him, and then he answers the question. So, anyways, the preterist view is stating all of that is some people say even through 51 it's all happened, that all of that is included in the Jewish Roman War and the temple being destroyed. I could see where they get there, but I kind of think it's more split, just as I'm reading and studying. But the futurist view, which we will discuss right now, and these are just other texts that the Olivet Discourse is in, but I just want to focus on 24. So let's talk about the futurist view. So the person who would land in this view is probably a premillennial dispensationalist or a historic pre-mill person who believes there will be a millennial reign of Christ for 1,000 years on the earth. That would be the person in that camp. So the futurist view states this. This is the main idea of the futurist view, that most of Matthew 24 are future events that will occur just before Christ's second coming. This view would be almost certainly see verses 15 through 51 as events that have not occurred yet. So from 15 to 51, it would be a pretty locked in. These things have not occurred yet. They haven't occurred. They didn't occur then, and they haven't occurred now. They will occur whenever the Antichrist shows up. Premillennials would hold to this view, both dispensational and the historic premill people that were landing in that camp. Now, if I just asked right now with the people in this room, is that how you've probably either always heard it talked about or just kind of been like, yeah, that's because all the time, and I was guilty of this, and I would even quote little phrases like within the Olivet Discourse in reference to maybe Christ's second coming. These things have to happen, whatever the case may be. And I don't know if I just had not really laid into it and tried to understand it. I mean, I don't even know. I was several years into my faith before anybody had ever referenced the destruction of the temple in AD 70. It just didn't get brought up. I don't know if that was just weak preaching I was around or what, but it just never got brought up. And then when it got brought up, I was like, oh man, that's crazy. So that makes sense that there are things that in the Bible that could have been talked about in the New Testament that were maybe referencing that event. That makes sense, right? Just because it happened. And that would have been really the end, as I said last week, kind of the end of the Judaic age. I mean, that's the end of the sacrificial systems. There's never been the temple built. It's done. Now Jesus, somebody made this comment this week as I was listening to a guy talk on this. He said, think about the temple veil tearing, y'all. What do we think about? Because we just talked about that several weeks ago in our resurrection series. But when the veil tore, I've always just kind of understood that as there's access to anyone who will call on the name of the Lord. And I had a guy that was listening to, and he said, y'all, he goes, I see it that way, but I also see paralleled with that view, Jesus has already flipped over the tables and yelled. That ripping is a divine wrathful ripping of if you didn't get it then, you're going to get it now. The rocks have split. The veil is torn. So I mean, yes, beautiful that the veil tore. Praise the Lord for that. Access, it means that, but it also, like he said, I just never thought about it, it is a divine mark of judgment on those people. All those priests in there that have done all of their stuff, and they just think this is just, look at me, robed, dressed, adding laws to this. I go in. I'm the high priest this year. I can go in the Holy of Holies. They walk in this 7-inch thick, 60-foot tall, 30-foot wide veil is just split from top to bottom. As to say, no more of that. I am here, and if you didn't believe it, here's the judgment. So it is a great act of love, but also a great act of wrath and judgment to say, this is no longer going to be. Your temple is nothing. And then in 40 years, from the time of Jesus' resurrection, 40 years later, at AD 70, what happens? They level the temple. Man. So he made a point then, but they were still making sacrifices. And now, I don't know. I don't have any history of this. I don't know if they tried to go in there and restitch the veil. I don't know what they did, or they tried to get a new one up, whatever they did. I don't have any reference point of history what they did. I've always been curious of that because they continued to make sacrifices till the temple was leveled 40 years later. So I'm just curious. They could obviously make sacrifices outside of the Holy of Holies, but I would assume that next year, whoever the high priest was like, I don't know if I'm going in there. Like, that seems like not a good idea. So the futurist view is that all of this is in the future. And so some of the defenses for this, so this is the defense of this view, is this, that the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24:21 is still a future event and was not part of the Jewish-Roman war and the temple being destroyed in 70 AD. So they would say, well, the Great Tribulation hasn't occurred yet. Jesus talks about there will be this Great Tribulation, right, such that no one has ever seen or never will see. That was the point. And I think some people are thinking, well, if only 1 million Jews died, that was kind of the detailed note Josephus wrote. Maybe it was exaggerated. Well, surely there will be greater events in the future, right, that would be more than 1 million people dying. Like, surely just in the scope of the world, wouldn't we have more than that? So that's kind of an argument going, well, that may have been some tribulation then, but it wasn't the Great Tribulation. It's not the main thing. And then they would go to the book of Daniel, and then I'm just going to read Daniel 12:1 says this, at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of the people, that is Michael the archangel in this apocalyptic prophetic word Daniel's given, and there shall be a time of trouble. And a lot of times that time of trouble they are referencing, any premillennial is referencing a future tribulation that Daniel is speaking about at the Antichrist arrival. So it's very interesting. I have always kind of like understood it that way over the years just because it's what was the most common thing taught in the U.S. It was just always taught like that. So I just kind of said, oh, anytime Great Tribulation or time of trouble or desolation, anything like that is a reference to what? Future events in the future that whatever, and then if there's a secret rapture, then you don't have to worry about it and I don't have to worry about it, right? That was always the thought. But that's very common in America. We talked about those views. The dispensational view is a very new view, 250 years old. It's not an old view at all. I can't even find an early church father that even could make a reference to this view. But yet it's become so saturated in the Left Behind series and the Kirk Cameron stuff that, you've seen the movies and the books. Revelation, or there will be a time of trouble such as never has been seen since there was a nation till that time. So Jesus says, right, he says there will be great trouble, tribulation, unlike anything that's ever been seen. So it does sound like it's pretty parallel with Daniel 12. Like Jesus even references Daniel. He says, as Daniel wrote, let the reader understand. So Jesus is even referencing back to Daniel, to the prophet Daniel. He's saying, yeah, Daniel spoke about this. There again, that was always understood. For the futurists, they're seeing that as Daniel spoke about it. Jesus said that Daniel spoke about it. Jesus spoke about it. But what is he speaking about? Future tribulation with an Antichrist. That's the understanding of this view. So they're seeing all of these texts as still yet not even having been fulfilled, but it is a future point. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And so there again, you have the Lamb's Book of Life in Revelation. that, kind of correlating. So they're what they're doing is like saying, let's take all these and let's see how we tie those together, right? It makes sense, right? You're reading the Old Testament, the New Testament, you're reading Revelation, you're trying to figure out how all these things tie together. Also, Revelation 7, 13 through 14 is another text they'll use. This view would. It says, then one of the elders addressed me, saying, who are these, clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? I said to him, sir, you know. He said to me, these are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So there's another reference point to what? Great tribulation, end of the church age when Christ returns. I just want to note, though, that to me doesn't necessarily have to mean that end times, that doesn't necessarily have to mean that. It can just mean those who at the time were faithful during the time of the destruction of the temple. Like those believers that were faithful to the Lord that God has redeemed. It can mean that, but I just want to make the point, this is the defense for it. Then we have this, the abomination of desolation. That phrase we see in Daniel, but in Mark 24:15 is an event that's always been associated. This view associates it with the Antichrist, the abomination of desolation. Daniel 9:27, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall come him who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. That's always been, all these texts are just pointing to future events, or at least this view sees these events that are being written as not yet happened. Daniel 11:31, forces from all shall appear and profane the temple and fortress and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. Daniel 12:11, and from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Daniel 12:11. So all these texts, and really, I mean, if you see it as symbolic, if you see this as kind of symbolizing something greater, not a literal one-to-one, or if you see it as these events are describing what's happened in Jerusalem in AD 70, then does that make sense? So, and we've done this since the very beginning. Everybody who holds a view is literally looking at the same 30 texts, and they're just seeing them differently played out. Does that make sense? That's really what happens. I mean, all these texts, if you notice, when I went through the views, we're reading the same text, and one guy says, well, this means this, and another guy goes, well, I'm reading the text, and I'm saying it means this. So it's really just a matter of how you interpret that text. Now, let me just say this. Thank goodness that none of this stuff, although I think it shouldn't be, some people do make it a primary issue, I think there's a lot of charity and tertiary issues, third level stuff that we should not be breaking fellowship over because we see that a little bit different, if that makes sense. So if you hold to a different view, that's okay. That's totally fine. We have people in our church, I know, that kind of hold a little bit different view than I would hold on the end times. There's nothing wrong with that. Like we all agree on the main things, but somebody may say, no, I think that's literally going to happen. There's a literal millennial reign, which is totally fine. I'm not even knocking that. And here's the deal. I'm going to say this, and this is just me trying to have a lot of humility. If I'm wrong in my stance, I'm perfectly okay if I'm not nailing it on that every time, if that makes sense. I'm okay if I'm wrong with this. Other things I think are absolutely assured 1,000,000% that are closed-fisted issues, but I do think this, because there's no church creed, and there's been no creed or anything throughout church history that has ever stated you must land on this particular view of the end times, which I think says a lot, because the church knew historically there's no way we can say, thus saith the Lord, this is the view. They just said there was no way we could say that. We know he's returning. We know there will be a resurrection of the dead. We know there will be new heavens, new earth. We know there will be a final judgment. All those things are clear. We agree on those things, but we can't totally say this is the exact timeline and the dots connected like this. So I think that's important. But also, too, it's in the text, so we should wrestle with the text. We should do that. Christians should wrestle with the text. So the abomination of desolation, that's kind of another point they make. And then the Son of Man reference. So you probably saw that. If you flip back to, let's see, is it verse 30 of the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24? If you go back to verse 30, you will see the phrase, then will appear in the heaven the sign of the Son of Man. Then all tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So they read that and go, what? Son of Man, Matthew 24, 30, 31, what does that mean? Physical coming back, actual bodily coming back in the clouds, same way that he went up. That's how they see that. And then Daniel 7, 13 through 14 is that reference. I'll read it right quick. It says this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So Daniel 7, they're saying that's a reference to Christ returning as he defeats the Antichrist. And they're saying that reference in Mark 24 is that exact reference of the Lord coming back. Okay? So that's kind of the view. That's the understanding. And I wasn't able to put these out, but let me just run through these right quick. The strengths of this view, okay? The strength, though I'm having trouble kind of getting there just when I read the text. So the strengths of this view would be that this view takes the global and cosmic events mentioned literally, right? What they're trying to do is when they read the text, they want to read this and say, hey man, we need to read the Bible literally. We don't need to read it figuratively. If Jesus said this was going to happen, the Son of Man coming, what do we need to believe? Son of Man's coming. Like that we need to see it as a physical second return of Jesus. Why would you see it any other way? So that's one strength of the view, because I do acknowledge that if you hold to this view, the premillennial view, whether historical or dispensational, they want to read every text in Scripture, even a lot of the apocalyptic and prophetic text in Daniel, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Revelation. They want to read all those texts extremely literal, like a one-for-one. And I understand that, and I don't think that's unadmirable. Probably one of the guys that has one of the most influence on me in all of my Christian life was John MacArthur, who passed away last year, and he was a pretty hardcore dispensationalist, and I just could never get to what he was saying, although he was very convincing in his arguments. I just couldn't get him reading such a literalness into the text when it was apocalyptic in a vision anyways. So, anyways, all that to say. But you may land there, and if you do, that's fine. Like, there's nothing but love there. But also, too, this view aligns with future events in Revelation that see this view, the revelation that this view sees as still yet to come. So it kind of parallels with some stuff in Revelation that they would say, well, that's still yet to come. And that's the last book written, so we need to be mindful of the wording is kind of similar in the Old Testament prophets. Jesus says it, and then the Revelation, some of the wording in Revelation is kind of similar. You know, so what is happening is they're trying to see it all on one strand. Okay, all of this connects and makes sense, right? If you were putting together a timeline for something that happened, you would be pulling events from here and here. Okay, why did this happen? Then this happened, and then what's going to happen? You would be putting a timeline out if you were trying to figure that out. So that's what scholars are doing. That's what pastors are doing. Theologians are doing that. So, but some of the challenges of this view, some of the challenges are this, and this is probably the biggest one, is the phrase throughout this section, Matthew 23, 24, and into 25, is that Jesus uses this phrase multiple times, this generation. He uses the phrase, this generation. Now, what's difficult about that is that this word, and I'm going to pull it up right quick, just so we can see it in my interlinear Bible. I want to show you what the Greek word is. Matthew 24, go to my concordance. right quick. So the word generation is genia, G-E-N-E-A, G-E-N-E-A, or genea, however you would say that, genea. So that phrase, genea, is for generation. It is used 38 times in the New Testament. And not one time can I find that it references anything else except for the immediate generation that it speaks to. Does that make sense? So not any time else does the phrase generation mean anything but the generation in whom whoever's speaking to is speaking to. In this generation, Jesus tells the disciples, you wicked generation. He's just saying it. In this generation, or you did this in Abraham's generation. They did that to him. Like he's always referencing, even if he's referencing a past generation, it's always that particular group of people. And it makes sense, right? So I've kind of tried to ask, well, what do you do with the phrase this generation? Because he uses it all throughout the text. He says it. I mean, all the way down to, and then guys can kind of flip back to page 4 on your page. If you go to page 4 and you look at verse 34, he says this, truly, verse 34 of Matthew 24, truly I say to you, this generation, genea, will not pass away until all these things, what? Take place. Jesus says that. Now, I want you to notice something even more powerful that Jesus says in follow-up with that statement. Heaven and earth will pass away. Like, ultimately, they'll pass away, but my words, what? Will not pass away. I just want to say this. I mean, if you hold that view, that's fine. And let's just say that word generation in this one text doesn't mean what it means in every other text. Could that be the case? Possibly, I guess. Possibly, just because of the way the text is. But I would just say this. Jesus literally says emphatically, my words will not pass away. And what I'm saying is, he is putting as much emphasis on what he's saying being true as anything. Everything else will pass away, my word will not. I mean, he's saying it pretty emphatically. So, I mean, I guess kind of the burden of proof would be on the person to go, well, how are you going to make this generation, which he says at the end of Matthew 23, he says it throughout 24, and he makes it very clear. Now, I want to just, also too, he does not say anything about this generation after verse 35. He kind of just starts almost a new answer, which we talked about a couple weeks ago. He starts a new kind of phrase, and I believe that's referencing the second coming of Christ, and he kind of answers that question. But notice this, y'all, the word you is used constantly when he is referencing all of the stuff in the beginning. He's constantly saying, and you will, and you will, and you. I mean, could you mean you all church future? Now, the word generation here, the phrase generation, and there's been two scholars I read who hold to a futurist view. They say everything is pretty literal except for this generation, and what he means is a type or a kind or a sort of people is what the generation's referencing. And it's really just hard, I think it's just hard to get to that grammatically. Now, let me ask you this. Could it possibly be in the mystery of the Lord referencing that? Maybe, I don't know, probably not. I don't know, but he could, right? But they're just saying because he's talking about future things, it could be. It could be, possibly. So, but I do understand where people kind of get wrapped up in that. So this generation, all of the you statements that he makes it to me very difficult to be like, I mean, listen, the disciples did not seem the most brilliant. I know it's easy to pick on them because, well, if we were disciples, we'd have been probably right in that boat with them. Like, what? Huh? We'd have been bringing spices to the tomb thinking we was going to prepare the dead body, right? We was going to be just like them, be just like Peter. No, Lord, I'll never let you die. Like we would have been the same feisty, confused group. Thomas, I want to put my fingers in the holes before I believe. We say all this because we have the Bible and we have all the context. They did not. So all the statements of the you, this generation makes it very difficult to make that generation mean something else. And then the fact that the temple did get destroyed in AD 70. That's a fact. That's not even like well, did it happen? Jesus referenced the stones being removed, and he says it will happen then. And then, even within the text, I just thought this was so interesting. Even in the text, Jesus represents like what? The city of Jerusalem. He talks about Judea. Like he's referencing places that they would have immediately known where they were. And my thought was if he's talking about end of the world stuff, he would have been like, wherever you're at, any part of the earth, flee to the mountains. By the way, if all of this is coming down legitly, what does it matter if you run to the mountains? I don't know how that's going to save you. Like if this is referencing the Armageddon, if it's referencing the very end, I don't know how that would help you anyways, if that makes sense. So, and then also too, and this right here for me really kind of like was hard to get around, but we talk about desolation, the abomination of desolation, end times, Antichrist. But listen to this in, listen to this in Luke 21, 20 through 22. Because we don't get an explanation in Matthew's gospel for the abomination of desolation. We don't get an explanation. But in Luke's gospel, we do. Listen to this. It says, but when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, right, which is what happened in AD 70, then know that its desolation has come near. The same word every other time that's used with the abomination of desolation. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart. Those who are inside the city depart from the city. And let not those who are out in the country enter it, for these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Now, I just thought that was pretty profound that in Luke's gospel, he references what the desolation is. When you see the army surrounding and they're taking the city, that's the desolation. Okay. So Jesus kind of references Daniel, but then kind of defines what Daniel was talking about to begin with. Hey, the desolation is this. Okay? Daniel's speaking to all these Jews, right? He's speaking to these people who would need this warning about a future event. So anyways, all that to say, I think there are some strengths and challenges within the futurist view, but I do think to see all of this as a future thing really would make it very difficult for this generation, the abomination of desolation, all the you statements, who he's talking to, the context makes perfect sense that he's just answering a question to them too. And I just feel like the language would have been much more broad, and he would have said, into the future, and you will tell people. Like it seemed that he's, this idea that, hey, none of this will, look, this generation won't pass away before you see this. And even if you wanted to read the next part, as Matthew 24, some people in the preterist view believe that there's a good bit of the next chunk. 36, if you just said, even if you read that, it says, but concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels or heaven, nor the Son of Man, but the Father only. Even if you wanted to read that text as a reference to the temple being destroyed, even if you wanted to, that kind of works too, because Jesus is saying, I don't know the time or the date that it's going to all happen. I don't know that. Like, in your generation it'll happen, but I don't know when. Because obviously Jesus is both divine and he's man. So we're not going to get into that talk right now. I don't want to, you can't separate his divinity from his human nature and his divine nature, okay? We can't separate them, but we can distinguish between the two, which is why Jesus could say in his earthly, unglorified body, he could say what? Well, only the Father knows the time of all those things, right? He could say that because in his understanding, because it hasn't been divinely given to him yet, the Father hasn't revealed that in his human state, he can just say, yeah, no one knows. So, but that makes a whole lot of sense, because it's like the same way when Jesus goes up into heaven, right? At the ascension, when he goes into heaven, the angels go, what are you doing? Go get to work. He'll come back the same way. Don't worry about that. Like basically to say, it's not for you to know, dude. Because if you did have a timeline, you would be looking at your watch, right? You know, your kids are doing something. How much time we got? How much time we got? How much time we got? Hey, why don't you just do what I asked? Don't worry about what time it is. Parker all the time, like she has got somewhere to go. Dad, what time is it? She'll walk up to me and she'll go, what time is it? And look at me like she has a business meeting the next 30 minutes. And I'll go, it's 8:32. She'll go, okay. And then she'll run off. And I'll go, did you need that for something? No, just ask. She'll come back 30 minutes later. What time is it? Like, just wanting to know what time it is. So it's interesting to go, like, hey, you don't need to know all those details. Be faithful, serve the Lord, evangelize. And to be honest, if we're being faithful with all those things, then really any view that happens, any of the ones that go down, will it really matter? It really won't matter because you're going to be faithful, serving, loving, devoted to the gospel. Because, I mean, y'all, I know people that I believe they're so emphatic on this, they have really probably abandoned a lot of their responsibilities for the sake of seeking some answer for this. And it's like, man, the Lord did not call you to try to figure all this out. He called you to walk by faith, to live faithfully, to serve Him, and to care for the things that He's put in your charge. So that's really the main thing that we need to do. So next week, fellowship supper, taco bar, don't forget that, next Wednesday night. And then we will hit the last two views, the historicist view and the idealist view, kind of the symbolic or the kind of the already but not yet continually happening. I think those are really, really interesting and have some good stuff to say. So we'll talk about that. Thank you guys for hanging out with us tonight, watching online, and we'll see you Sunday at 10 a.m. Know that we love you and Jesus loves you.